It started from an American Baptist missionary who worked with Hong. And of course, at this point, it's hard to get the extra stuff. But he was an American, but I'm afraid with a difference. He was from Charleston, South Carolina, cradle of secessionism and center of British agent recruiting in the southern states. We can go into the
Baha'is they didn't kill anyone. They were persecuted in Iran.
Fine, I'm sorry, Mazaheri is no longer with us, but these are the ones that he says.
You're saying that Baha'is actually went out and killed people?
No. That this was the destabilization. In other words, what Mazaheri said was that the problem of the British in India and other places, or in the Arab world, was that Muslims would not work for the British. So they had to create a split within Islam so that you get the Baha'is who were then willing to work for the British as colonial administrators, things like this. So it's not all at the level of killing. I mean, Marx is also not so much at the level of killing, right? Or sometimes.
Baha'is have nothing to do with Muslims.
Yeah, I know. They're a split off out of it, right? They come out of it. So, and here's another one. Sleeman. Right, this is the synthesis of what is known as Hinduism, would appear to have occurred under a British governor by the name of Sleeman. In other words, the combination of elements of folk religion and other elements, and above all, Sleeman's principal contribution was the Thagi, Sati cult, the stranglers, the widow burning, and stuff like this. That this was made, that in other words, the most backward and horrific features were brought into the fore, which is what, this is what we've seen them do, in Afghanistan and some other places. Then the other one that is worth mentioning is in Islam also, before we get to this area, Wahhabism and Salafism, according to some, and this is not what my book is about, but that Wahhabism and Salafism were promoted by the British in India before they were introduced into Saudi Arabia and other places. So what I'm trying to point to in my brief is the British are massively engaged in religious and confessional engineering, falsification, and all the rest of it. Right? There's also a kind of worldwide notion that the end of the world is near. And to me this rings a bell because I've done research about the Venetians and Luther, or indeed the Venetians and Savonarola. Savonarola being a kind of a precursor of a lot of these things. So, but the main thing I want to tell you is the British and the Mormons. Let's just tick off some of the things. 1835, we have the first documented contact of an envoy of the British Apostolic Catholic Church coming from England and meeting with Joseph Smith in 1835. I think this is still Kirtland, Ohio. 1837, Joseph Smith sends envoys to London, to northern England in particular, and by 1839, Joseph Smith transfers the entire quorum of the 12, including Brigham Young, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, and other bigwigs. They all go to northern England. And one of the people they recruit is Miles A. Romney. Miles A. Romney brings the family over. But all the leaders are essentially anglicized, and from that point on, the massive recruitment of the Mormons comes from Britain. Charles Dickens, in The Uncommercial Traveler, writes about visiting a boatload of Mormons that are about to leave for, I guess by that time it's Salt Lake City. But get the idea. The massive recruiting, right? The Welsh, the English are the biggest single group, north of England, not south, but north, poorer people, and Scots, plus Scandinavia. And what it shows is that most people who end up in Salt Lake City have no connection whatever to the United States. It's not American, it's a foreign country of people who they're not interested in the U.S., rather they hate the U.S., because this is what Brigham Young talks about all the time. Now, a couple of, that's already enough to prove it, right? You can't go into Britain, I'm sorry. It was a police state then, it's a police state now. It had elements of a police state under Queen Elizabeth, with the pursuivants. If you were a Catholic, there was a network to get you. If you look at what is created, right, the state of Deseret, there's a foreign body, and it's allied with the British. And it's going to be ready at the time of Southern secession to create a new front. So that's the geopolitics, right? Why Salt Lake City, godforsaken place, right? Why go there? Because that's where the telegraph and later the railroad, right? The golden spike is where? Provo, Utah. Get the picture? That's where you have to have it. So, how did this come to a head then? There were two cases, right? One is 1857. Brigham Young seceded from the United States. It's the first example of secessionism. It's the first civil war in the history of the United States. And it's the first time a president says terrorism, a strange system of terrorism under Brigham Young, is ruling Utah Territory. But notice, he secedes as a territory, not even as a state. Of course, the state has no rights except to be governed ultimately by the Congress and a territorial governor. But they do all this. What he's obviously thinking about is he sees bleeding Kansas, he sees the terrorism and violence going on in Kansas, and he knows that John Brown is about to attack. And he thinks that the Civil War will break out in 1858. And he guesses wrong, and he's got to stall. And at that point, Buchanan sends Albert Sidney Johnson, the guy who got killed at Shiloh. He was the Confederate commander at Shiloh, got killed there. He leads the U.S. Army in to take over at least a little piece of Utah Territory. In the process, Brigham Young secedes, and he says, no more wagon trains can cross Utah Territory. And there happened to be, somebody was mentioning it before, the so-called Fancher-Brown Party coming from Arkansas and going to California. They have no interest in the Mormons. They're just transiting. They're on their way out. They're almost at the border with the Utah border. Brigham Young sends in the Danites and the Shenpips and kills 130 men, women, and children down to the age of 5 or even 4. It's the biggest massacre between, the War of 1812 or the Revolution and the Civil War. There's nothing on this scale, right? It's the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And if you look at Romney, it's probably a story that's too long to tell, but one of the things that set this up was Parley Pratt had gone to chase women in California, and he had found for his harem, I think the 12th wife, he found a woman from Arkansas, and her husband disagreed, and eventually Parley Pratt got killed by the husband. So this is, of course, deicide. So there's a special hatred against Arkansas. That's one of the things that makes it possible. But mainly he wants to shut off, essentially to cut the United States off from California, which was a state, right, which was an important state, and the only way to get there was across these trails. So they invoke that and then proceed to do this massacre. Mitt Romney's family is implicated in this because Parley Pratt is the bloody shirt that they wave. Mike Leavitt, the transition director and future White House chief of staff, covered up for this. He's got an ancestor, a direct ancestor was one of the killers. Senator Lee of Utah, Tea Party, who thinks that child labor laws are unconstitutional. He's a descendant. In other words, you look at the top levels of the Romney Mormon machine these days, and you'll see that one of your tickets to get in is you had to have an ancestor who took part in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Is that the kind of future you want? All right. Then, during the Civil War, and actually I come into this, I said Yankee. First of all, Brigham Young is euphoric. You can see things in his office stuff. They say, we've never seen him so happy. Fort Sumter, Bull Run, people getting killed, cities being burned. Oh, he says, it's Joseph Smith's Civil War prophecy, and it's what they deserve, right? Schadenfreude of the Mormons against the United States. They couldn't be happier. And what they're saying, this is not for the Confederates at all. They say, the Yankees and the Confederates will kill each other, and we'll take over everything. That's their perspective. Let them kill each other, rivers of blood, and then the saints can come marching in. Except that there was loyal California, people from California. If you are from California, if you have any sense of being a little bit left out of the Civil War narrative, now you're back in. Because it's loyal regiments from California under the general, a Boston, an Irishman born in Ireland who had lived in New York, Patrick Connor. They come in and they face down Brigham Young. And they remind me of the Berlin Brigade, right? Because they march in there. They say to the Shenpips and the Danites, they say, we're coming into Salt Lake City even if hell gapes below us. They take over this little fort. There are about 800 of them. Brigham Young could mobilize 50,000 if he wanted to. The Berlin Brigade, right? And they say to Brigham Young, look, you can kill us, but if you do, your whole territory will be razed to the ground, and a gulf stream of bayonets will sweep you and your polygamous monstrosity away. And eventually that works. But that doesn't change, well, Brigham Young's animus, right? We have great quotes from Brigham Young that Abraham Lincoln is an accursed scoundrel, that, well, it just goes on, right? And you'll never feel more American. When you read that they say the damned Americans, the Gentiles, and how we're going to kill them, again, this is quite an eye-opener, and not exactly the narrative of hyper-patriotism and chauvinism that we've been looking for. One of Brigham Young's daughters comments in a moment of candor saying, Salt Lake City, this is in the late 60s, early 70s, is the world's biggest whorehouse. And this is where we get the excesses of polygamy. That you can marry a woman and her daughter. You can marry a woman and multiple daughters. One of them marries a woman and her granddaughter. One of them marries a woman with daughters who are too young, so you have to wait. And the little girls say, you ask them, what are you going to do when you grow up? We're going to marry Pa. Another case, a nice-looking girl is brought in by her father, who has to be there for business. He protects her from the polygamist. He dies. At the gravesite, the Mormon bishop who pronounced the funeral forces this girl to marry him on the spot, because otherwise that's the end of her. We have Brigham Young. Brigham Young has a friend, asks him, my wife is protesting against polygamy, what should we do? He says, to save the sister's soul, cut her throat. And they do. And you have that all described. Okay, just a couple of other things. I mentioned with Smoot that this was a scandal when he came to Washington, that he supports the oath of supremacy of the prophet. I submit to you, this is, again, not like the Vatican and Kennedy. Right? This is something more on the side of religious power. During the 1930s, there is a scandalous flirtation of the saints and the Nazis, for the reasons that should be obvious, right? The Nazis and the saints see each other as white supremacist, Jim Crow, religion, politics. There's also this deeper question of the antinomianism and the Nietzschean Superman, right? If you can become a god under Joseph Smith, you can become a Superman under Nietzsche. This is quite similar. So we have, when Hitler seizes power, the Deseret News says, Hitler's a great guy, he's a vegetarian, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, he's just like us. And later on, in 1939, very late in the day, April 1939, the Mormons write in the Nazi daily newspaper, right? Der Völkische Beobachter gets an article, Im Lande der Mormonen, in the land of the Mormons, and how the race, Rasse and Volk are cultivated. So the Nazi would read that and say, these are our friends. The only religions that were allowed to continue in Nazi Germany were official Roman Catholic and two kinds of Protestants, either Lutheran or Reformed, Dutch Reformed Calvinist, and Mormonism. Nobody else. Not Jews, of course, not Seventh-day Adventists, not Christian Scientists. Foreign cults were especially banned. Mormonism would seem to be a foreign cult, but maybe they had a use for them. Maybe in an occupation. Who knows? Let's just jump ahead. George Romney. Great guy, huh? George Romney? Older people may remember George Romney coming on during Disneyland in the 1950s, selling his cars.
Yeah.
He was a sponsor. Okay, what's with him? Well, he went to work for Alcoa, Aluminum Corporation of America, and then later became the spokesman for the Automobile Manufacturers Association. What's the common denominator? These are two of the branches of U.S. industry that are most heavily implicated in Nazi cartels. With the aluminum cartel, it's very, very strong. Harold Ickes, New Dealer, friend of Roosevelt, says, if we lose World War II, we can thank Alcoa for not producing aluminum because they want to keep their monopoly and respect their cartel agreements with the Nazi corporations on the other side. Then later on, you go to work for the automobile companies. You're working for Henry Ford, who financed Hitler, Irene DuPont, who owns General Motors. He's a Hitler admirer. Alfred P. Sloan. In other words, you've got German Ford, Opel for General Motors. They're intimately connected. And then I looked at Romney's 1968 presidential campaign, and this is really interesting. This gets us to Paul Ryan, too, not just Mitt. George Romney in 1968, right, he's running for president. He says, it's a moral crisis. We've got to have the family. We've got to have family values. We've got to have, you can imagine, on and on. It's a moral crisis. Now, what is this? This is something called moral rearmament. Has anybody ever heard of it? Yep. It's called Buchmanism, or moral rearmament, which is pro-Hitler. It starts in Britain in the late 30s, and it says, the main problem is not Hitler or people like this. It's that we are morally deteriorated. We have to reassert our morality. And that's then what George Romney ran on in 1968. And I haven't been able to go there, but they said that his papers, he's got a block of about 20 boxes of papers. He's got a panel as governor about moral regeneration here in the United States. Now, you hear Paul Ryan saying, those poor people, they need to get a sense of discipline. They need to get a sense of order in their lives. Hey, moral rearmament walks and lives. All right, so Romney was happy to be in a racist church. We probably should have devoted more attention to this point. As of the Book of Abraham, around 1840, if you are black, if you are the son of Ham, descended from Ham, Ham is some figure they claim was black in Egypt, you cannot become a priest of the Mormon church. Now, priest is a very low level. Priest is really like confirmed in a Christian context, right? It goes priest, elder. Elder is not, not really, it's not an elder like a Presbyterian elder. It's priest, elder. Then you can be a bishop. A bishop is the equivalent of a parish priest. A stake president, stake mean stake in the tent of Zion. The stake president would be like a Christian bishop. But Romney has been both. He's been a bishop and a stake president. So he's a bishop. Hence the title, Bishop Romney. Have we ever had a president who's a bishop? I don't think so. So it's a racist church in the sense that if you're black, you can't become a member of the priesthood, which is usually 12 or 13. So Romney became a recruiter for a racist church for the first 30 years of his life. He was content to stay in a racist church. Now, you have to think about this. If you're a racist looking for a lily-white congregation, who could offer you that? By the time of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, the mainline Protestants couldn't, the Catholics couldn't. Who could? The Mormons could. And this meant that Mormonism was always reactionary. It was always flirting with Hitler, I would say. But then in the 60s and 70s, there's an influx where the reactionary part becomes even greater. Note Ezra Taft Benson. Ezra Taft Benson became the prophet. He became the head of the whole thing. He is associated with the idea that Martin Luther King is a communist and civil rights is communism, says Ezra Taft Benson. And when the reactionaries and racists wanted to recruit a candidate in 1968, before they tried Governor Wallace, They offered it to Ezra Taft Benson, and he was restrained by the hierarchy. But then when Wallace became the presidential nominee, he came back to Ezra Taft Benson and said, why don't you be the vice presidential nominee? But he couldn't. Another interesting tentacle here is the John Birch Society, if you remember them. This is wholly a tentacle of Mormonism. And the key guy there is Cleon Skousen. In terms of the ideology, I know that the money comes from this guy, the Robert Welsh and the jam and grape juice king. But Cleon Skousen wrote the books, right? The Naked Capitalist and so forth. Cleon Skousen, good example of the FBI Mormon Mafia, because he was from the FBI, became chief of police, Salt Lake City, and then became this kind of a theoretician. Now, the John Birch Society, center of gravity where? Wisconsin. Wisconsin Republican Party. Ryan. So Ryan, when Mitt says, I got that good chemistry with Paul, what do they mean? It means that we got the mainline Mormons and we've got an ideological tentacle of Mormonism. This is ironic because the Republican Party in 1856 was born as the party that said, we're against polygamy and slavery. Republican platform 1856. And now, with Romney and Ryan, polygamy, at least, and slavery of a certain kind, I think, is actually knocking at the door. All right, now there'll be a million more things. Let me just wrap up. There's a million scandals, right? Tag Romney is implicated in controlling voting machines. I urge people, get ready for massive vote fraud. Notice I say vote fraud, not voter fraud. Voter fraud is done by little people for, petty cash. It's of no consequence. I'm talking voter fraud done by Karl Rove. Hey, guess where Karl Rove grew up? Salt Lake City. Is Karl Rove a crypto-Mormon? I guess only his bishop or his confessor or whatever he has that knows for sure. But he has imbibed the antinomian spirit of Mormonism, as we've all seen. So I'm getting ready for vote fraud, meaning computer-generated massive millions of votes. And of course, it's perfectly clear, right? The Republican Party does not want black or brown people to vote. And who joins them in this? Mormon theology. The anti-black part is the Book of Abraham. The anti-brown part is the Book of Mormon itself. If you're black or brown, it means that somewhere back in your family tree, it was an angel who refused to take sides between the Mormon Jesus and his brother, otherwise known as the devil. So if you have a skin color, it's because of this. Now, two quick scenarios. If Romney wins, Romney is likely to represent the end of divided government and a complete GOP regime. And again, it'll be neocons for foreign policy and Mormons for domestic and economic. And if you're not one of those groups, woe to you. Then, I believe that they will have an attempt to create a permanent austerity dictatorship, which is what Karl Rove, the crypto-Mormon, as I call him, the crypto-Mormon Karl Rove has been planning, right? 40 years of dictatorship. The way they'll do this is suppress the franchise, you know how, voter ID, purge the rolls, no early voting, harassment, intimidation, signs, whatever it is. You've got Citizens United with maximum money coming in, and then you've also got the Supreme Court. How about Orrin Hatch or Mike Lee or somebody like this on the Supreme? How about Mike Leavitt for the Supreme Court? I don't know. And in the background, the CIA Mormon Mafia, the FBI Mormon Mafia. I think that would then be an attempt to have a permanent austerity dictatorship under the auspices of the Republican Party. Now, suppose Obama wins. One of the hopes, I got this right after Romney had visited the Bilderberger Group in Chantilly, Virginia. He made a secret trip into the Bilderberger at the beginning of June. Not Obama, but Romney.
This year?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
We were right there. I mean, we didn't see him, but we got the word out. it's clear he's the establishment candidate, right? Wall Street is giving him more money. The Federal Reserve did not act to keep Obama in power, and the Bilderberger Group seems to want Mitt, right? Because this is it's like somebody like Berlusconi, or where the richest man, or a rich businessman takes over the government of the country, kind of thing you associate with Latin America or some less developed democratic tradition. Certainly, it's a tremendous step downward for us here. He'll try to steal the election with the help of Karl Rove, but now let's suppose it doesn't work. The Republican Party has to win now, because in the future they may be doomed. This is the party of white men, reactionary older white men. How many of them are there? There's a vanishing breed. So now we have Hispanics, we have Asians, we have all sorts of other people. Another election cycle may put the presidency permanently out of reach. In other words, if you're the racist, reactionary, and xenophobic, right, anti-immigrant Republican Party, what's your perspective? It's not good, is it? I think that eventually they might dwindle to being what they really are, which is a bunch of racists and reactionaries in the Deep South and maybe some high plains or some other places. And this might actually go very, very fast. If Romney loses, there would then be a wave of acrimony where the Tea Party people come forward and say, we told you he's not reactionary enough. You need a pure blood reactionary as presidential candidate. This will carry them off the stage, I would say. And at that point, we also know that Obama will attack his own base in November and December. This is the so-called grand bargain. We've read the Des Moines Register interview. We've read all the internal stuff. Obama is going to go for killer austerity. After running against killer austerity, at least most people think, he will turn around and impose killer austerity. That's the grand bargain. That's the lame duck session. That's the fiscal cliff. In other words, he'll say, we're going to gouge trillions out of Medicare. We're going to gouge trillions out of Social Security. Just read that Des Moines Register.
There's Greek model, basically.
Yes, a Greek, Spanish, or British style severe austerity.
Or Portugal today.
Now, with Romney, it's clear you're going to get that, right? I would just say the Romney argument to the ruling class would be, I'll give you a 30% cut in the U.S. standard of living, and that money goes into your pocket. That they like. Obama says, I'll give you a 15% cut, and it'll be available for bailouts and corporate welfare. And, says Obama, in my way of doing things, you won't have all the extra cost of riots, strikes, and maybe a civil war. In other words, he'll say the overhead expenses of Obama's method are less, because with his radiant visage, he dispels all resistance. Whereas with Romney, you're going to gear up for some heavy-duty struggle, right? I mean, people can feel it, right, once the shock has passed. So, but then, eventually, my scenario for getting out of this terrible impasse, which we've been now for the last 8 years, if the Republican Party can be crushingly defeated, and at this point, any defeat is a crushing defeat, because again, the demographics are working against them. The clock is ticking, right? Their racism is coming home to roost. Their hatred of foreigners is coming home to roost. They could collapse. Again, dwindle. They wouldn't be a national party anymore. They shouldn't be. With all the money in Koch's coffers, right, or Koch's coffers. But then we have the Democratic Party. What should happen to them? That they split into two parts. A Wall Street Democrats with Obama and Schumer and so many of them, Pelosi, and something more radical, something more populist. Not Wall Street 100%. Who could this be? Well, Marcy Kaptur, DeFazio, Sherrod Brown, there are some others, right?
Barbara Lee.
Yeah, right, people like this. Some of the Black Caucus, not all. But a lot of them would have to go along just for the sake of appearances. But you get the idea. And as far as I can see, that's the hopeful scenario. Republicans lose, Democrats split. And again, it can go very, very fast. Now, the last thing is, who do I support? People say to me, who should I vote for? Who should I vote for? First of all, forget about it, right? Getting voting is not like getting married, right? It's not a choice of that sort. It can be done for tactical reasons, cynical reasons. You want to avoid you want to keep divided government. You want to avoid one-party rule. You want to try to vote for the protest party if you find one that has the most bang to the buck. My sentimental favorite, Sherry Hunkala, running vice president for the Green Party. I don't like the Green Party, but Sherry Hunkala had the great merit. She ran for sheriff of Philadelphia a year ago, and her program was, you elect me sheriff, there will be no more foreclosures, because I won't carry them out. I'll block them. And unfortunately, a lot of dumb people from the Democratic machine voted for the opposition, so she didn't get that. But that's some scrap of decency to vote for. But the main thing I recommend is Obama, the death of 1,000 cuts. Romney, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all over in 3 minutes on you. So what I recommend, I spent the weekend in New York City on the eve of the hurricane, the United Front Against Austerity. I'm calling for people to organize against this monstrosity. The Wall Street Democrats and the reactionary Republicans, if the ruling class says to you, Romney and Obama now choose, the answer is general strike. To get out there and say no to this. This is absolutely unacceptable. And it takes a while, right? It took a while in Greece, it took a while elsewhere, but eventually, if the American people are not just going to lie down and play dead, there will be now a new season of what I would call class struggle, labor struggles to be sure. And the point is, Romney and Obama each offer opportunities and difficulties, but this is the world that's now coming, and if you don't do this, you will get austerity on the Greek model, and we'll get suicide rising as a cause of death in this country too. So I urge you, the reason I wrote this is I thought I had thoroughly discredited Obama with 2 books, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, and Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography. So I had nothing more to add to that. I think I've told you everything about Obama there is to tell. And I don't think any books have added anything much to what I had already found. But now I thought I had to, even with limited resources, to put this out. Now, if you want to support my work, your path is clear. Go to progressivepress.com. Buy a copy for $6, the price of a latte. You can get a nice ebook copy, or for your library, for holiday giving, all the year-end holidays coming up. One lady said she'd given her, she gave it to her father, and he was extremely angry at Romney finding these things out. Because this is designed to travel far among people who are not necessarily left-wingers, right? In other words, it points to this aspect of treason, right, of subversion, right, of hating the United States. And again, you can be ambivalent about that, but you really don't want somebody who hates the American people in the White House. That would be my strong recommendation. This is not a good idea. Right? This is going to lead to problems.
Is it time for questions?
I guess it is.
I thought that's what we have now.
Yeah.
Very much.
Well, again, I allow you to compare. Right? With Romney, it's the 47% tirade, right? The 47% are parasites. They'll never take responsibility for their own lives. And somehow it's that they are morally flawed. Bookmanism, right? Moral rearmament. The problem is with you. You are morally inferior, you 47%. Now, it's outrageous, right? Because these are veterans, you've heard this all from Democrats, right? Saying how outrageous it is. But in the case of Obama, you know what he says, right? He goes through the stuff about the bitter clingers, right? He says, the jobs disappeared 25 years ago. By the way, he's also talking to moneybags. With Romney, it's moneybags in Florida. Obama, moneybags in San Francisco. So Obama talks to his moneybags in 2008, and he says, the jobs went away 25 years ago, and the people are left there. The jobs didn't come back. That's his man Volcker who took the jobs, but he didn't tell you that. They're there clinging bitterly to guns, religion, anti-trade. Now, I cling to anti-trade big time. because I would like a protective tariff, and I never voted for globalization, and essentially, hating people that are not like you, says Obama. So I would say if you compare those, you'd say, yes, Obama does have an animus against large parts of the American people, no doubt about it. But I think in the case of Romney, the animus is more severe. In other words, it's more from the school of the oath of vengeance, rather than with Obama, it's the foundation view. In other words, that it ultimately says the American masses are practically hopeless. They're super patriots. They're racist. They're reactionaries, and we don't like them. I mean, that would be the sort of upper middle class social engineering view. But with Romney, it's much more. This is now a super rich moral rearmament view, which I think is more extreme. That's just my impression.
Why don't the Bilderbergs like Obama?
Because his usefulness is expired, they would say.
He was there last year.
He aborted.
They like him too.
He aborted the moment, right? The moment was 2008. If you had somebody of the caliber of Franklin D. Roosevelt, you could have had sweeping reform, break the back of Wall Street, break the power of finance capital, introduce a second New Deal. Could have been done. And there were even those advancing programs in real time, how it could be done, like me. But what Obama did was to abort the moment. Now, the moments will come back, we hope. We don't know, but we hope. But that moment is aborted.
I think the thing about Obama is he's had a momentum. He's passed the NDAA with indefinite detention. He's bailed out the banks. He's done a lot of things that's made them happy in the Bilderberg.
Yes.
But, now to stall because people are starting to wake up. So if you get a new guy in there, oh look, Mitt Romney, he's going to save us. And it's the same thing when you had Bush. Oh, Obama's going to be so much better, hope and change. And it's like it's just a sick psychological twist all the time of hope and this bullshit when it's the same candidate over and over again who is bought off by the bankers. I mean, when you were talking, I was reminded of Aleister Crowley, who says, "Do what thou wilt," because that is what they do. Whatever is good for them, and takes from us, the poor and the middle class. Whatever is right for them, do what thou wilt. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, I mean, the entire ruling elite is I tried to point out, on the right wing we have Nietzscheanism, we have Ayn Randism, right? Ayn Rand would be a derivative of Nietzsche. So now we've got the new Ayn Rand movie, we've got Ryan being an acolyte of Ayn Rand, and then we've got this Mormon version. In the case of Obama, this is Obama is simply a puppet. Because Obama was in there to abort the moment. And when the bankers came to the White House, Obama said to them, the only thing standing between you and the pitchforks is me. So you better value me. But now, they're not afraid of him anymore. They're not afraid of the moment. Right? They feel that they can dump him and go to an extreme austerity dictatorship. Yeah. And indeed, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of resistance.
Webster, one thing, back to fantastic. We have a Congressional Progressive Caucus. There's only 62 guys in it. I think most people are afraid of being called a progressive. But what do you think of that? I'm going to have I mentioned a lame duck agenda session, a workshop, and get the CPCs to work on that. Kucinich, I know you. A little about him, but we got some pretty good people there. But what do you think of the CPC?
Well, there are a lot of left liberal mushheads and leftist mushheads in there, right? And I consider that to be a debilitating disease. In other words, if Noam Chomsky is your idea of an intellectual, if Michael Moore is your idea of a filmmaker, and Amy Goodman is your idea of a news source, then my condolences go with you as you go down to defeat. In other words, one of the problems in Greece, right? In order to create Syriza, right, the left bloc that went from 3% to 28% or something like this, was that they had to say, certain people who have been acting as leaders have to be dumped. They've got to go, and that would include most of the, again, left liberal stalwarts of the last decades, right? These people are worse than useless. They're absolute poison. They're guaranteed failure and downfall, right? So you got to have something much more radical has got to be to be brought in. So, no, but he wanted to hear about the caucus. Yeah, some of those people in that caucus have to break out of it, though, because there are people, I don't want to mention names. Is Lynn Woolsey retiring? I think she is. I can say she was an example of what kind of leadership not to have. And of course, Kucinich, if you're going to do all that Kucinich, you might as well tell the truth about the main covert operations and things like that, which he always refused to do. So now he's harvested defeat. A lot of these people have been defeated so many times that they're practically synonymous with defeat, impotence, and the impossibility of doing anything. So I would recommend something new.